This is the OFN Today on the Orlads Football Network, and we are going to talk analytics. That's right. Break up the excitement. But no, that's where the game has actually turned in recent years. If you're a big Pro Football Focus fan, then you'll know that there are a lot of people out there that are jonesing for any inside track that they can get to find out about their team, players, and so forth. And that's why we're going to talk to Ryan Tracy. He's the founder of Rogue Analytics and the host of the Locked On Chiefs podcast. And hopefully soon enough, we'll be able to talk Kansas City Chiefs football too, Ryan. But I wanted to have you on the show to talk about your analytics business. And was the was the influence of Pro Football Focus, was that at all part of what got you interested in your own analytics-based business?
I like what they do in certain aspects, and certainly seeing how well it's taken off the last few years. They were definitely somebody that you can point to and say that this is a viable business venture. In terms of the scope of it, though, it's something that I've done for a very long time since I was a GA strength and conditioning coach back in the day, and I've continued to work as an exercise physiologist for the last 20 years. And a lot of what it's evolved into for me in the physiological analytics comes from those old days of pro days and pre-combine workouts and what used to be just guys running 40s and trying to improve their times into what you can actually measure and apply towards the field.
All right. Well, let's dive in because there's so much to ask you about regarding your business here. And again, it's just taking a look at your 2020 NFL draft guide. It's titled The Athletic Matrix and Functional Production Player Metrics. So we dive in here and tell me a little bit about, I guess what you break it down. You break down the matrix into, you have master athletic, explosion, power, short area quickness, explosive range, and deep range. Where did you come up with these terms, and exactly why did you come up with these terms?
So these are all some constituent parts that go into different aspects of different positional play. There's no need to measure an offensive lineman's deep range because he's not going to be doing that.
Yeah.
So while older metrics like Spark and some of the early just comparisons of raw measurements in 40 times, even 10 splits, give you an idea, apples to apples, but they don't really explore the breadth of what actually happens during a play for X player at X position. So that's why I tried to break them up into positional roles. I don't do deep range on anybody other than the wide receivers and defensive backs because they're the ones that have to cover the most ground and that is most pertinent to their game functionally. So I tried to take what each position does, or at least positional groups, offensive linemen. I don't get into specifics about what a center is going to do athletically versus a tackle, although they do have different job assignments on any given play. And there are some tweaks that I do for my private customers rather than for the public information that I put out. But it's all about tuning what you can apply from standardized testing into combinations that really reflect what a given player is going to do on the field.
All right. So if we just go with quarterbacks, you break it down here. You've got standard touchdown to interception ratio, passing touchdown per game, passing yards per game, yards per completion, and then the completions per touchdown, which is your passing efficiency. Number of completions thrown for each touchdown pass thrown. Lower values reflect higher scoring efficiency. So how does this differ, or how does this help a scout? Let's say you have a scout that has his own old school ways of scouting a quarterback. Tell me how this is going to help them out based on these metrics.
It really breaks it down in terms that are familiar, especially scouts that have experience, especially anybody that isn't one of the new generation that are trying to break into it. Someone who has experience looking at players from their performance-based standards, That's what they're looking for, is the numbers. How often do they do something in relation to how something often they do something negatively? It's more easily acceptable and more easily identifiable with the play on the field than it is some of the advanced metrics that people like PFF use, where you're talking about all these adjusted air yards and wins above replacement, and some of these things that are more analytical and possibly even more predictive, but they don't reflect on-world production. And that's why I try to break it down. In terms of the production stats, that is really a piece on top of what I do athletically. The core of my business is about the athleticism, but I like to include those because you can then correlate athletic prowess at some positions and how it relates to some of their actual production stats, as long as we're not getting too theoretical, because that's what I leave for the other people that are true statistician doctors of that. And you see some of that over at PFF.
Okay, so taking a look at the quarterbacks from this past class, let's see. We have the athletic matrix. So you're breaking down the quarterback position into how many categories?
Generally, for the quarterbacks, we're just going to look at their ability to break the pocket. So short area quickness, dodging pass rushers, the ability to actually get out and accelerate. So you're going to see that explosive aspect, so that if they do get an opportunity to scramble, they can take advantage of it. Those are the two that I focus on the most, because that's what we want to see. I don't think there's that many quarterbacks in the league. Not everybody is Lamar Jackson, that you're actually looking to see what he can be producing with his legs. So it is about being opportunistic. And I think those are the two stats in particular that show you what a quarterback can do when he's given the opportunity to take something the defense is giving him.
Okay, so now the way they break down, for instance, if you take a look at the combine and they break down each player or each position, and they say, okay, uh, based on this ability or this test, they're rated. Here are your top 10, or here's the player. For instance, if you have quarterbacks master athletic matrix category, what would be considered close to this at the combine? Because you have Hurts one, which I think the average person
Mm-hmm.
understands.
Mm-hmm.
The average person who doesn't watch Hawaii football would go, wow, Cole McDonald's second. He's ahead of Justin Herbert. So obviously he's better than Justin Herbert and everybody else in this particular category. So is this what category would this be closely resembling when we're talking about the combine?
It's a combination of everything that goes into it. How explosive he is off of the ground, that plays into playing through contact, breaking out of tackles, the explosive bits, which is going to be generally his takeoff, heavily emphasized on the 10 split rather than the 40 time or anything like that. But there isn't one test at the combine that represents that. That's why this matrix is a makeup of different aspects in different weights of what each of those tests represent.
Okay. And then you have, then we have explosion, which looks like it's pretty similar there. And then we go to, so what is SAQ?
Short area quickness,
short area
ability
quickness.
to change direction.
Okay, and that's once again where Jalen Hurts seems to be ahead of everybody else. Seems like Jalen Hurts it might be your best quarterback.
If you're talking about athleticism, he definitely is, and that's the draw, is then comparing the athleticism to the production and what you can project from there. It is very much not meant to be a how well he throws the ball or how well he reads a defense, but how well he moves around. The quarterbacks, honestly, in this particular matrix are the ones that have really the least impact to how they play, because of the cerebral nature of the position and how important arm strength it is to the way that they play on the field.
So if you're when you it's interesting because the athletic part of this, isn't that more analysis, judgment, as opposed to the statistics?
Judgment in terms of when to use your athleticism, certainly, but you still have to have the horses in the pen, so to speak. If you don't have the ability to accelerate, breaking tackles becomes more difficult. If you don't have the ability to change direction, being able to sidestep and still deliver a pass is also more difficult. So it is cerebral in picking when to use it, but you have to have the tools.
And I guess a better way of saying it is that some of these categories, again, if we're talking about athletics, explosion, uh, short area quickness, explosive range, that to me sounds like more of a scouting tool. Whereas when we go into touchdowns per interception, yards per completion, those are just stats. Anybody could do the stats. So the scouting part of it, the first part, isn't that what makes your information, I guess, more special? Is that's really what we're looking for? Anybody can come up with stats, right? So isn't it that scouting part what we're really after when we're taking a look at your information? Even though we understand that you have this formula that you're using the stats and combining it with everything else.
No, you hit it on the head. In fact, I'm not combining it. The production stats have nothing to do with the athletic
Okay.
matrix. That is there for reference and correlation to how more athletic players do at their position in terms of production. But you're absolutely correct. What I do is unique to the athleticism part, how you scout and quantitate what they're able to do physically. I'm a physiologist by training and a former strength and conditioning coach. The production there is there for reference, like you said. Quite honestly, production stats can be twisted in a number of ways to tell a story that you want to tell. What I'm trying to show is the correlation between athleticism and what it means on the field in terms of production. But you are definitely right. The scouting aspect of it and how that player is then able to test, that is sometimes revealing more so than what they actually do on the field, because it reveals the possibilities, the capabilities he has physically that maybe he hasn't been able to put on the field due to whatever his role happens to be, or because he's told not to scramble in a quarterback's situation. Tell you the truth, but maybe he has more of that ability that he hasn't actually shown. That's what I'm trying to dig into the
All right.
deepest.
How many years have you done this?
These stats I've kept for going over a decade,
Okay.
and I've been in the physiology world for about 20 years.
Okay, then let's use Jalen Hurts as an example.
Mhm.
Have you had a quarterback that has been number one in all 5 athleticism categories? If so, who are they, or how have they compared then? Or let's just say we have. Well, first of all, let's just get that question through first. Have you had another quarterback that has had the number one grade for all 5 categories?
I have. I'd have to go back and pull who that was, but what the guide will show you is I don't keep historical and just try to keep a total roster of who's ever better. Michael Vick, as you see him change direction, would have been
Oh yeah,
above most of the players that I've ever put into this
yeah.
formula. The difference is, and what I use is the 7-year average, because we see as generational players change and even the quarterback position has become more athletic. So I try to keep it into that 5 to 7 year
Okay.
window. And usually what I publish is the 7 year. And so you get an idea of where the number of players in a given class are versus the average. And in this particular class, you find that there were 7 above that 7-year mean, with Hertz obviously being at the top, but that doesn't go to slight anybody else like Justin Herbert, or Kelly or Love, who I think are still above the average, but they just don't stand out as athletically exceptional.
Okay. Uh, and that would be interesting to me to find out, because if I'm thinking about looking at an unknown right now, because we haven't seen these kids play yet in the NFL, and I see Hertz in this situation on top of his game athleticism, what I would probably want to do then is find out, okay, what other quarterbacks have been that good in your, as far as your rankings were concerned, athletically, what were their production rankings then as well? Were they similar to Hurts? A little bit better, a little bit lower. And if they were similar, then how did that quarterback turn out? And
Sure. Use that for correlation into their success in the
yes.
league, right?
And how would one go about doing that? Finding that information out?
Well, that's information that's published on a yearly basis. Other than that, it's something that I keep for my personal clients. So it's not readily available to the public. But
Okay.
the concept is there and is correct that you want to try to pull and tease those things out. And it's difficult because you have to accommodate for what the style of the offense is in the quarterbacks, as an example, what the opportunity was, et cetera, et cetera. But that is definitely something that you can go back and take a look at. And as I pull up, there are some inconsistencies when you see guys that have tested positively overall in the past, guys who have done quite well that have not made it in the league, like a Johnny Manziel, who was solid, not exceptional, but was out there. Somebody else who didn't fare as well athletically in these particular tests and these matrices, like Patrick Mahomes, clearly has become the elite of the elite. So the quarterback position in particular is a difficult correlation to success because of all those variables. It is a little bit more straightforward in judging athleticism for the skill positions and the defensive line in particular. Those are actually a much more easier step to take in terms of what they have to do on the field from the college level to the professional level.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this and I see Cole McDonald,
mm-hmm.
second best athlete on the board with your rankings, and I look at the production rankings, and we all know again that Cole McDonald, because of the program, the scheme, his numbers are going to be pretty good. Doesn't mean that some of his numbers won't, like completion percentage, and there are other things to factor in that he may not be very good at. But I mean, I would look at this and I would say, well, Cole McDonald has a pretty decent, is pretty favorable or looked on favorably with your numbers. What does that tell us?
It tells me that if you are looking for a developmental quarterback, somebody that you feel after the scouting process, you've identified clearly his traits of strength and the things that he needs to work on. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for someone to develop and you're trying to differentiate between, say, a Jake Fromm and a Cole McDonald, and you want someone that's able to escape the pocket and make those ad-lib type plays, or at least give himself the opportunity to, then I think it becomes a pretty stark difference in what you're getting for the athlete at that position. And then I would probably take a chance on McDonald myself.
Okay. And I guess this would also be the same thing with Jalen Hurts, is that we would want to, because I'm assuming when you put this together, because I've done many similar projects like you have with stats, which we all know what happens when you're trying to build a formula that works. And when I use my formulas, I use it for handicapping. So I have to build a formula that I know works. So I have to now, and I got and I'll build a formula. I'll put all these different variables in, but then I got to look over, say, that 5 or 10 year period, and if it looks like, oh well, I guess this didn't really work out, the formula is telling me that this player should be winning more often, and he's not, or this team should be winning more often, it's not, based on my formula, then I know the formula is no good and I have to throw it out. And I got to try another formula until I get the right formula that makes the most sense and gives me the best percentage chance to use it as one of my handicapping tools. So I'm assuming you've done the same thing.
Something similar. I don't get to that point because I don't make the leap from athleticism to the production on the field. I leave that to the coaching staffs because there are too many variables there. What I try to differentiate is that this is what the athletic capability is at X level. And if he's performing in expectations lower than that, how can you then try to get the most out of what he's physically capable of? And if he is somebody that is very explosive but doesn't carry a lot of strength, that clearly shows up on tape as well. But it might be able to give you some more distinct patterns of what he can actually do that he's very good at, and try to emphasize and play to his strengths. That's where I go into a bit of the predictive parts, but it's not quite like handicapping because that's just too
Oh
all
yeah,
encompassing.
sure. Who would be your who wants this information? Who would be able to take advantage of this of your analytics more?
Really, it should be personnel departments, pro scouts that are looking at the college ranks, or college recruiters that are looking at the high school ranks. The formulas here are applicable across athletes anywhere from the high school level up, because they are specific to the sport rather than what we've seen in years past and some of the other composite scores that tried to substitute different tests that were meant for younger children. That's how Spark started, and actually didn't really make that leap in representing true athleticism in this sport. Whereas this is all designed to combine these tests in combinations that reflect what players do in their role on the field.
Okay, now, and I had mentioned this before. So, see, for someone like me, if I was, and everybody is different, but I would assume that if those those individuals feel this is going to be a good tool for them, then they also want to see, okay, how do the numbers work in the past, and what
Mhm.
was successful or what wasn't, so they can find out themselves by looking at the numbers and maybe giving themselves a percentage of, well, more often than not, if the numbers tell me this, then I have a pretty good idea that I've got some positive things going on here with this particular player.
Mhm.
So that's going to be an important tool for me, or vice versa. Uh, so I would guess that that's information that you, what do you provide that for them, or do they have to actually do all of the work to come up with whether or not it works?
No, I provide that for them, and I even go a step farther. When I am engaged with someone who has a scouting department, I actually take this, which is the data that I use is the publicly available testing results, either from the combine, from pro days, from agents around the league, et cetera. But the really interesting part is when you have different scouting departments that have their own watches on things, that have their own sets of data about how they timed or how they measured something, and things that aren't necessarily included in the combine results. There are other measurements people use around the league that are also telling in certain ways. And this matrix approach allows me to do is to take their data sets, plug in their numbers, and derive what my formulas are at. But my base formulas that are in the public view are generic, for lack of a better term. They don't differentiate between a 3-4 outside linebacker at 255 pounds versus a 4-3 D end at 295. So what I try to do is engage with clients who want to specify not only what their positional needs are, but what their emphasis is in their philosophy. So that way I can take into account what a particular staff is looking for in a player type. And then I can go back across any of the standardized tests that I have the data banks for and reapply new standards based on what the customer is looking for, whether that's the Cleveland Browns or the University of Akron.
Let's say you were having a conversation with Dan Shanka, who's the head scout at ourlads.com, and you wanted to, in a very small window of time, in a couple of
Mm-hmm.
minutes, to catch, to excite him enough that he knows that this is something that he wants to talk to you more about, and we can have a much longer conversation on it. How would you pitch it to someone like Dan?
I would put it like this. Give me the archetype player that you're looking for at position X. Say it's a pass rushing edge player. Give me what your prototype is, what you want, who you emulate as the guy that fits your system and your goals the best. And I will go find you in the past, and certainly as we get new data on new players, I'll find you the guys that match that profile down to their ability to move laterally, to generate power, to play through contact, through all these things that are as close to that archetype as can be, and we can work outward generation by generation from there. But it allows you to take guys that you scout on film and identify as players you like, and then narrow it down to who fits exactly what you're looking for based on what you already do.
It sounds like to me that this is actually more valuable to a scout that is with a team, that they have their,
Mhm.
this is their team, this is what they're looking for, they know their schemes, they know what they need to find to fit those positions, and this is why this information would be helpful to them.
Very much so. And I don't know, the big question for me is organization to organization is, does that mean a particular scout? Does that mean a personnel director who has the bigger scope and just let your scouts go out and find talent that they like and they think they can apply without trying to narrow the window? Because you don't want to narrow it too far so you miss prospects that you feel can take one aspect of their game and really emphasize it and can actually be a productive player for you. So I'm not trying to narrow anybody's view. I'm trying to help them target what they've already found.
Okay. Does this, I'm assuming this makes you a better analyst yourself. Okay.
It does.
In what respect do you believe it makes you a better analyst more for scouting college kids or as an NFL analyst?
For me, it's for the NFL aspect of it because I've got all the backstory on them in the pre-draft process, and I've determined how I feel they can function athletically. It allows me to look across the league at how they're being used, what system drafted into, what positional stance are they going to be playing out of. Like a Jordan Willis for an example a few years ago. Very big difference in him with a hand down versus playing from his feet. This is something that was going to be a big difference in where he was drafted that made an impact on how his career path was going to go. So it lets me take a step back and see systemically, is this a good fit? Is this going to emphasize what this player's natural abilities are? Or is this something where he's going to have to fight to adapt and overcome maybe a physical limitation that doesn't fit the system well, but again, is something that he can mentally overcome in terms of scheme, assignment, et cetera. It is a big combination, but it lets me target guys that I think are in a bigger opportunity to win or to be successful at their position based on where they land.
So you actually feel that you would be equipped better to be a really good post-draft analyst, somebody that could take the players that were drafted by the specific teams and decide whether or not, based on your analysis, your information, your analytics, whether or not the teams got it right with those players and within the schemes that they're going to be running.
I certainly think it would be a good aspect to as a second check, but I actually think it would be best post-combine pre-draft to set the board, to help differentiate between prospects that might have the same grade on film but clearly have different strengths based on the scouting notes, and then try to differentiate about who looks like physically they have the most upside to fit in the scheme. It may be the goal of this is to give those small differences in athletic profiles that can make big differences in the way that they adapt to a team scheme and how well they produce for that team.
All right, give me some recent success stories.
There's a number of fits that I've really liked over the years. Clearly, it goes back and forth. I thought Harold Landry was a guy coming out as a pass rusher that was higher on my results than most anyone had him on a draft board. And while he hasn't been exceptional at the NFL level, I think he's gone a lot farther than most had predicted. I feel comfortable about him. Clearly, there are some that have skill sets that don't pan out. I think we're the.
Do you have any of those that you've?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
Absolutely. Marcus Davenport, for instance, let's see what he can become. He has a good score in the athletic matrix, hasn't put it together yet. Is that a fit issue? Is that a coaching issue? Is that something that is outside of these metrics that would be discovered in an interview or something like that? There are questions there. When I look at, say, cornerbacks, let me pan over here. There are some consistencies and there are some outliers, right? Denzel Ward is, until this last season, was the highest score in the matrix for a cornerback in the league. Has he become an elite player? I think that's arguable. Certainly very good. But when you take it and you look at the score that he put up versus Jeff Kuda in this last class, you get an idea that there is some separation there physically. It becomes about that scheme. So
Favoring who?
I would say favoring Denzel Ward
Really?
in terms of
It's
athleticism.
interesting
Yes.
because just talking to some of the uh, some people, some of our analysts over the last few weeks, there seems to be, especially like for instance, I know Jeff Risdon who covers both Cleveland and Detroit. So so those are the two teams he covers, and he's one that believes from the early indication or the information he's received from people at Ohio State and people with Detroit that Okudah is a much more talented player than Ward. And if you like Ward, then you're really going to like Okudah.
And I would say from film, I would agree with that. When you break down who has better explosive range, it is definitely Denzel Ward. When you break down who's got the best overall, it comes out as Ward. It's not a drastic change, but it is significant. It isn't that close. And so that becomes the transition of physical capability towards actual production in the scheme. And that's always a question. But that's what I like to point out is some of these things you wouldn't necessarily put together in terms of physical capability, that you might get, say, a 5th round pick that's actually a better athlete than a guy taken 2 rounds before him, but it's about how he's used and maximizing what he's physically capable
All
of.
right. So, how did the Chiefs do as far as the draft this year?
The Chiefs have been interesting. They took a running back that is middle of the road in my metrics, but is clearly, I mean, in the last, I want to say 5 years, the best fit in the scheme that Andy Reid runs. So
Now,
you
first
can't
of all,
put it
Ryan, you
all
say
on the
middle of the road in your metrics. Does that mean he would be graded out uh, as far as the draft as a middle round draft pick?
No. I don't do round gradations.
So, what do you mean by
I'm
middle
just
of the
looking,
road then?
meaning in a class of 26 that were above the annual average, he was 13
As
in
far
the
as running
athletic metric.
backs.
Correct.
Okay. So if you did that then I would probably have to put him, and again, I know that's not what you do, but if you're saying he's around 13 and he was definitely drafted higher than your
Mhm.
matrix.
Yes, just based on pure athleticism, definitely.
But as you
However,
said with the fit, that's different.
absolutely. And that comes back to a skill set in the pass game that isn't necessarily a measurable that can be put into the matrix. But when you do look at his profile, you see that the power is a little bit lacking, but his change of direction amongst the running backs is in the top
Yeah,
6
sure.
it is. So you have that balance and you can see how that works. Then it becomes a question of, do you want a back that relies on making players miss tackles, shifting out of them, rather than somebody with contact balance like the Chiefs had a few years ago, who can run through tackles like Kareem Hunt did? That becomes the illustration here of, can you really rely on him to make those shifty cuts and consistently make players miss?
Okay. And look, I mean, if you watch enough college football and you're a big fan and you followed LSU on their way to the championship and you watched all their big games, you understood how valuable this kid was to LSU and their success. Very underrated. Didn't get a lot of the press because of Burrow and the receivers. But again, if you watched the big games and you saw the impact he made, especially in the open field, breaking tackles and gaining those extra yards, you understood what the talent this kid had, and then you can understand where Andy Reid was his thinking was, where the way that he runs his offense and how this kid makes a lot of sense for his offense because it's not your typical offense for a running back. It's just not, but this is the perfect running back for this team.
It is definitely, and you can see that how he relies on in space players, particularly at the running back position. So the making missed tackles, producing missed tackles helps him. But it's also an aspect, and he's actually spoken, Andy Reid has lately, about the preparation aspect. So the mental aspect that goes into Clyde, who's just over 5'7", how well has he been in the playbook? How well is he adjusting to pass protecting in the NFL against bigger, faster, stronger athletes all the way around? That part definitely plays a piece, but I don't think Andy Reid would have taken a chance if he didn't feel that he fit the mold of what he needs somebody to do athletically.
Okay, now here's an interesting one, and that's Willie Gay Jr. because he was he was their second pick, and this is a guy that I know our lads did not grade anywhere near as high as where the Chiefs picked him. So, were you surprised, based on what you know of Willie Gay, that the Chiefs selected him as high as they did?
I was. I had personally on my board, I had him down at least another round. And that plays into how much was he on the field in college? How well did he carry out assignments? There were some question marks there. Clearly, the Chiefs as an organization are one of those that do place an emphasis on athleticism, because in this year's matrix, Willie Gay Jr. actually topped out the linebacker list above Isaiah Simmons when everything was said and done in all the athleticism measurements. And that's what they're leaning on: potential upside, the ability to be a unique athlete that they have to train up. And that's what coaches do.
Now, do you noticed then that is the same, the way that you have graded out Gay in your athleticism matrix compared to the way that he was graded at the combine athletically?
No, I didn't pay attention to grades at the combine.
So you don't ever
That
look
is
at
not
that to
something.
just see how your information, how it compares.
No, I try to stick my head in the sand and do what I do rather than adjusting to any of the outside noise.
I mean,
My
after the
goal is to.
fact, like you don't even take a look just to say, now that it's over, my information's in. I'm curious. How did they think about this player? Like the way, was it similar, and how I ranked my player?
Oh, sure, sure. I always take a look at that. And again, because I don't necessarily rank players in terms of their draft value, just according to this
Yes.
athleticism. So that's the big difference. Is I take the athleticism as one big chunk, but there are so many other aspects that are found in the scouting systems that really play into whether the value is there, especially on day one and even the first half of day two in the second round. So yes, I definitely pay attention to that, but I don't look for other influence in terms
I ca-
of
I
other
understand
entities
that. Yes.
that. Okay,
Okay, that
gotcha.
makes sense. Is there, just thinking off the top of your head, is there a player that you thought it was drafted late that you were kind of surprised and you think might be a really good scheme fit? Because when I think of players that, hey, you know what? Here's a sleeper. Here's a guy that I believe that was drafted in the 6th round or the 7th round, and I see the production in college, and I, I've had players like Aaron Jones, say, from Green Bay. Loved what he did at
Mhm.
UTEP, but he was small, so he's gonna later round guy. He's probably not going to do much in the NFL, but I still loved what I saw. Typical perfect sleeper, and that's exactly what he's become. So every year, I could always name a couple of guys at the top of my head, just from memory. Do you have a player or two on memory at the draft that who was selected later that you can just remember and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I remember this guy was selected pretty late, and I think he's actually a much better fit for that team than people think.
There's always a couple. Thinking back, I want to say, I mean, just looking, say the Chiefs example this year would be L'Jarius Sneed for me.
Okay.
Um, you could see that I think Darnay Holmes is going to be a good player. Didn't have a full range of testing for him, so he's actually not in my matrix because I don't have the data for him. But I do feel the way he was on the field can play a significant nickel role for somebody. When I look at years past, there's always hit or miss. There are always players. I'm trying to think. Noah Fant was a guy that was at the top of my tight end board in terms of athleticism that I thought was really dependent on the scheme that he went to. And I think what we saw initially with the Broncos is that it wasn't really working to his advantages, but the quarterback change late last season, I thought really gave him some spark. And I am optimistic that he may actually be eventually able to reach that potential.
Ryan, we can go on and on, but that's the reason why instead of going on and on in this particular show, we'll save it for another show. And we'll also talk some Kansas City Chiefs football soon enough. So you're excited about how can you not be after a Super Bowl championship? Right. I think that even though the NFL has a much better chance than these other three major leagues to have a real season, the more players start to opt out, and if anything starts to go crazy during the season, the more that you're going to wind up start seeing the potential of an asterisk in the 2020 season for whoever wins the Super Bowl. And it'll be an asterisk, of course, in everybody's minds. We hope that that's not the case, but that's certainly the case in all the other leagues. I don't care what anybody says. Whoever wins the championship in the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, there's a huge asterisk, and there ain't nothing anybody can say against that. But we hope that the NFL is going to be different. See, in Major League Baseball, I'm happy because the Nationals are my favorite team. They won the World Series. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care who wins the World Championship this year. I'm still going to be my team is still going to be defending champ when spring training hits next year. That's how I look at it. And if they screw around with the NFL season, then that's just a bonus for Kansas City Chiefs fans.
Yeah, I agree with you. There will definitely be an asterisk, but I think we'll take it either way.
Oh, well, why not? And look, the team can only get better anyhow, if you think about it. And it wasn't like their Super Bowl win was easy. It wasn't like their road to winning the Super Bowl was easy. So there is actually the ability for the Kansas City Chiefs to get better. Mm-hmm. That's the hope, right?
Very much so. And even the quarterback, he'll tell you himself that he's not there yet. And I think that's probably the scariest thing in the NFL right now.
All right, Ryan. So tell me how our viewers can find out more about your work.
You can find everything that I do through the Twitter account at Ryan Tracy NFL. And you can check out rogueapc.com. That's where the analytics are, as well as the Locked On Chiefs podcast and the RGR football channel.
And that's 5 days a week with the Locked On show?
It is. All Chiefs all the time.
Ryan, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.